Bill, welcome to Ultra Habits, man. We are so glad we have finally made this conversation happen.
Thank you for having me on.
Introduced to you by mutual friend Jeff Harris, and Jeff is a voracious learner, man. Like, he is always recommending books, people. He's inside my network, and he told me that you were somebody I had to connect with. And I did some research, and you and I obviously had a conversation, and I thought, yeah, it's going to be really great for the Ultra Habits community, particularly leaders and business owners, to understand what it takes to scale, right? Scale their business. Yeah. So for me, it's of interest because I work with a couple companies and I work with the owner founders in terms of helping them scale their business, but also helping them develop better habits themselves. And many of times, particularly within these smaller companies, I notice that a lot of it's tied together, right? Their personal habits, their leadership habits, and their ability then to help their company scale. That being said, before the show, we talked about where we were going to focus. And I think a good place to start is leadership and the owner entrepreneurs that are building and running these companies. What are some of the things that you've seen over time that help leaders scale?
First of all, the habits that we have, right? You're focused on shows, Ultra Habits, you're focused on habits. I would say that the way that we behave in the world as leaders then has an impact on the company. And the habits that we have are driven by, they're related to the normal way, the habitual way that we see the world. So my my habits of action are correlated to the habitual way I see the world, right? So I see the world a particular way. I think, yeah, I'm just a fat bastard and I'm never going to get healthy. Then why get off the couch, right? If I see the world that way. And so I think the things as a leader that make a difference, right? The first thing is inspiring, but you can't go inspire your team if you're not inspired yourself, right? That people see through that stuff. So, if I want to be inspired, years ago I was inspired to do something about my fitness, and I realized I had all the things. I was doing stuff, and yet the doing wasn't a match for what I really wanted. And so I'm like, I need something different. I need some inspiration. If I was honest about it in those days, I was like, look, eventually I'm going to have a heart attack, and I'm just going to get fatter. And I was just trying to delay the inevitable. So as a leader, we want to shift the way we see ourselves. We want to shift the way we see the company, the marketplace, the world. We want to be inspired by the future, and you can't fake it.
Would you say that, a leader that has bad or suboptimal personal habits is it's much more difficult for them to inspire change and inspire others because they're not walking the walk, but it also skews a lens in regards to how they look at life.
So my view of my fitness and all that was that, I was gonna get fatter and eventually I'd have a heart attack. I just wanted it to happen after my kids were grown. And so I'm like, well, if I want to alter the fitness, I needed to see something different. So I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to run a triathlon. And then I started to figure out what was involved in that and how you do that. And what wasn't even sure what it was, but I was now lit up because I'd taken on something bigger. I now saw myself and my future different. I'm going to be a triathlete because I said so, because I committed to it, right? And in a public way. And I think the same thing true with our companies. Like we say, no, we're going to solve this problem for the world, or we're going to be number one in the world, or we're going to, we take on some significant thing for the company and then we go for it. And that alters then the way we see the company in the future. But if you think the company's going to die or suffer, then there's no way you're going to get any better. Like you have to be lit up yourself. Then you can start to light everyone else up.
Bill, when you were unhealthy or you weren't operating in a healthy manner, and then you decided to get and double down on your fitness, were you a business leader at the time? Like, what was the context
I was
that you
the
were? Okay.
CEO of a company. We had hundreds of folks in factories that made our stuff. We sold in hundreds of stores around the world. We had a corporate staff of like 30 people or something like that. I had 2 kids, a wife, a dog, and a cat. I was doing my thing, and I didn't have time to work out. I had a premium gym membership. I had a personal trainer. I had all the things that you could have, and would need to have. But I would then call my trainer and say, "Listen, I can't get there today. I'm backed up on a project." So then I'd go drive through McDonald's. I'd pick up some food I'd eat at my desk, and so I'd pay not to work out.
Okay, so the question I have is, when you went on this fitness journey, how did that start to change? Was it like an immediate correlation to the change within your company, or was your company already pumping? Like did you notice a beneficial
For
change?
sure. So there was a payoff in the company and everywhere else because personally, I wasn't telling the truth to myself and I wasn't taking action and I was resigned. So, people see a guy who's just dialing it in. It's not the same. So now I take on the fitness, then I start to look around elsewhere and I see places where I'm delusional.
That's interesting. So once you started to ask yourself the hard questions and started to do the work, you developed more courage to actually call shit out, basically.
Yeah, look, I was honest about things. And what I saw in the honesty is that I was resigned around the fitness. But until I looked at it, I was unconscious to it. So if your company's results aren't great, if you're not fired up about the way things are or about any area of your life, anytime you take on one area, you're going to alter some other areas. Take on your business, you're going to see something. It is true that as leaders, we will get a few areas that feel good and then we'll neglect others. So we'll get our business going really well, but we won't deal with our personal fitness or our finance, or we'll let our marriage suffer and we'll focus on a couple things and put blinders onto the other. But eventually that catches up with you. Eventually there's a limit, an impact. So we want to be lit up in every area of life. And our business, our fitness, our relationship, our family, and you're always going to have breakdowns, but then you're dealing with it, and that is what it is to lead, right?
Bill, how does one do that though? Like how does one be across the multiple gears and ensure that you're like dialed in as required on those different levers?
So I think for me, it's about having a coach and a practice. So I always have lots of coaches. Now I'm a coach today, but I have coaches. I have coaches for speaking. I have coaches for fitness. I have coaches for some of my sports. I have financial coaches. I've always got somebody coaching me in some area, and I'm always looking across all the areas quarterly, annually. What are all the fundamental concerns of my life? How's my finance, my spirituality, my relationships, my friends, my family, my fitness and health? Like, how is it all?
So on the business category, so I'm now a business leader and I kind of got my shit together. I'm semi healthy and I'm like starting to see the light and call my shit out, and I've got some grasp of reality, and I'm looking at my company
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, well, this company's been stagnant for a while, and like I'm not scaling, I'm not growing.
yeah,
Like what do I do?
right. So there's two things that are really significant there. That all have to do. First is, do you see a future? Do you have a vision for this company? If you're excited about it, then there's probably a reason to be like genuinely excited about it, not faking it. Like genuinely excited about it, then you probably have a reason. If you're not, then there's some work to do. So when you see the future for the company, it's because you see an opportunity. It's because you see a way out. It's because you see that you can make a difference. And that pathway then is pretty clear. So I would suggest that if your business is flat, then and you're not growing, there's something wrong with your strategy. There's something where you're deluding yourself and you're not actually at work on a future. Now, it could be that you have something and it's not working yet. That's a different thing.
Does this model of scaling and the kind of dependencies and I guess the framework, does it vary on the size of the company? Like as a multinational that you're working with?
No. I'm talking about I have a vision for the future. I have a purpose, a why, something I care about. I have a big, hairy, audacious goal, something I want to accomplish or do in the world. I have a core customer. I know who I am for them. All of that world is what we get excited about. I'm suggesting that the core strategy of the company and our personal psychology are totally tied together.
Even in large companies where you might have a CEO that's got multi-layered people between them.
I've worked with companies that are over 100 years old. I've worked with companies that are fairly young. I've worked with companies that have gone through a period of growth and gone to hundreds of millions of dollars and then stalled out. I've gone with companies that have gone all the way to $1 billion and then come down in value. I've worked with a big range of companies, and it doesn't actually, I mean, there are unique challenges about size, and they are more driven by the number of employees you have. And they have to do with the way that you speak and engage people and delegate. That's a different conversation than, are we growing? Are we not growing? Am I excited? Am I not excited?
For smaller firms like SMEs and companies on the smaller end of town where the actual owner entrepreneur is still on the tools and more involved, what are generally the inhibitors that you see when you go
in the beginning stages, right? When we're first trying to get to $1 million US in sales, then the key issues are about, like, let's make sure that we actually have a particular product to focus, that kind of thing. As we go above $1 million to 20 million in sales, we start to get clear about it. But there is a temptation to do too many things still. So we still want to focus on one customer, one product or service, like or some very related things. We want to be focused and different. If we're not focused and different, operating against something we care about with a vision for the future, that can impact you at any stage. But at those early stages, I want to get clear about it. I'm not just taking any job with any customer who will pay me. That's like startup land.
And generally, these companies that you're talking about in this category, they're primarily sales led, I would imagine.
No, they could be anything. Like, I work with companies all the time that are, many of them, there's a weakness in sales. They're not even sure. They like happened into some business. So we want we want to focus in on some unique customer, some unique product or service, and in it be compelling and different in some way. And we want to stay focused on that. The next part, that next stage, when we start to get beyond a leader and a small team and we start to expand team, we're going to build our leadership team out initially, or start to develop leaders within the company. That part is about getting better at not only sharing the inspiration and being clear about it and attracting people and retaining people, but being able to connect this vision of the future, that what we're building, to you, to the person I'm speaking to who wants to hire, work, take a job, like that kind of thing, and connect it to your personal ambitions, your personal skills. When I can translate and connect what I'm working on with who you are, and you hear and see yourself and a role and an opportunity for yourself in the business, I start to attract and retain a leadership team.
How does the leader then ensure as they're going on this journey from like small, mid-sized to larger firm that they don't make themselves kind of the messiah, right? Like that actually translates into the actual business, and the business doesn't develop an over dependency on them as a leader. Quoting Jim Collins, right, and kind of that whole good to great piece around CEOs, a show horse versus a workhorse. Like, how does one, ensure that they are driving that within the DNA of the company?
Well, look, you can inspire people and engage people. But if you don't manage your ego and your dominance, you're going to have some issues. So a lot of companies can go to thousands of people and still be very dominant and still have an unchecked ego. But if I am thoughtfully managing myself in service of something, and I'm empowering other people, that I can actually do that. I'm reminded of a thing some years ago. After the 2008 downturn and that 2008, 2009 financial crisis, I had this thought that business leaders should come together, in particular in my area of a certain size, and that we could figure out together how to solve each other's problems that I wasn't going to be able to solve on my own. And I really thought we should come together for a day or two with a large group and do some roundtables and solve each other's problems. Because I saw other people and I'm like, oh, I know how to fix yours. But I was really stuck in my own rut about what to do. And so I wanted to put this together, but I'm really busy and I didn't want to do it. But then I turned to this other guy that I knew, and I shared with him my vision of how we could all come together and really help each other get through this difficult time. And then I said to him, look, I know that you are new in this organization and you're trying to make something happen. And like, I just feel like this is the kind of thing, like, I don't know, what do you see in this? It feels like this is right up your alley. And then he started to get excited about it. He's changed it in some ways and he made it his own. And then I don't know, it was about 6 or 8 weeks later, we had this event with 75 CEOs that came together and spent a whole day together. And we had some speakers and we worked through and sorted things out. And he was really proud of it. And I remember then, I don't know, 10 years later, running into him at a thing and talking about that time and all that. And he told me about how great it was and everything. He'd completely forgotten that I ever suggested the idea. It had become his idea. And I didn't correct him of it. I just was so delighted that I had been so effective as a leader. I was able to transfer something, the inspiration for something, and create an opportunity for him that he totally ran with it. And he did and gave me everything I wanted to, and I didn't have to do anything. Like that, to me, is one of my best moments as a leader.
Right. So what you're talking about is the team, getting a team in the context of being a leader, getting the team to buy in to the extent that it becomes part of their DNA, it becomes their idea, it becomes their why, their how.
We articulate the purpose. We're out to do this in the world, and we're going for this, BHAG. And this is kind of what I think it looks like along the way. And we create all that picture. And this is why I have you guys here. And now how are we going to get this done? And then everybody works on how to fulfill your vision.
With these firms that have BHAGs and that have the vision, and in your experience working as a coach, like when companies are stalled in scaling, how much of it has to do with the operational piece and cash flow?
Oh, all the time. So there's a couple different reasons. One is the demand sort of softens up. And then when that happens, then something shifted. Whatever we were doing isn't working anymore. We've missed a competitive thing or a trend or something like that. That's the first piece. But if there's demand there and we stall, it's because we had orders that we couldn't ship or fulfill or perform or that kind of thing. It's because we couldn't fund the production. It's because something broke. So operationally, things start to scale. Finance starts to scale out when you have demand and you're going up. And I've experienced that, and I've made those mistakes painfully, multi-million-dollar mistakes there.
When did you decide, Bill, to transition, I suppose, from running a company to doing what you're doing now? Like how did that come about, that transition?
So I was involved in 6 companies, either as CEO or a senior exec partner, and in a variety of industries. And then I started to get to a point in my life where I was going to move on from the company that I was running at the time. And I owned that company with my wife, and she had been the founder of the company, and I was the CEO, and for 10, 11 years. And we had a difference of opinion, but I had known for a long time that at some point I was going to go be a coach. Like that seemed to me like my second stage career or whatever, right? There are several career stages, but going from that to the other. And I thought, it probably ought to happen at about 50 or so. And then I looked and I'm like, oh shit, I'm 50. So that was really, it was kind of coming of age, the right time in my life and career to go do that. And I really enjoyed teaching, coaching, facilitating. And I like to have a big range of companies that I work with, not just one thing all the time. So it suited my sort of ADD nature to work with many different companies in different modes.
What's been the biggest challenge in that transition, Bill? Like what were some things that you had to wrap your head around becoming an advisor, coach, consultant, that we're like, oh shit, I didn't see this coming? Like
In the beginning, it was figuring out like who I am for others, right? So the first part is figuring out where I have what I need and what did I already have and what did people value. And that's true for a company as well as an individual. You're trying to figure out who you are, but in the eyes of other people. And that was the first challenge. The second one was kind of refining my brand and business model, and starting to develop a track record of success, figuring out what I was actually good at, right? Those are the second things. And then getting better at spotting the people who are a bad fit. They're not bad people, but I worked with a number of CEOs over time that were terrible fit for me, and whose issues I wasn't going to be able to address for whatever reason. Like they wouldn't listen to me, or they didn't like, they didn't like the messenger or the message for whatever reason.
And in talking about that, like in unpacking that a bit in terms of how you started to develop your own business model, like I suppose some of your work is more intense, some of it is more scalable. Like, how did you get that mix of intensity and where you're potentially a lot of your time is consumed, overlaid with having a product or service that's also scalable? Like, how did you go down that path?
Well, you're striking a balance, right? In the beginning, I looked at how do I want to work and who do I want to work with? And I balanced how I thought I could make an impact with people with what worked for me in terms of lifestyle and income and things like that. So there was a balance of those. Can I create enough value? What would it look like? And I didn't do it on my own. I listened to a lot of others. And for the most part, I copied some of the top coaches in the world of scaling up. The scaling up coach community is who I drew from. And I had definitely a lot of experience and other tools and things like that that I picked up before. But the engagement models, the pricing, a lot of things like that, I borrowed from the scaling up community. And then I started to refine and evolve it to suit me. And today, I actually work with thousands of companies a year to different degrees, right? And some pay me more for a lot more attention because their goals are greater. Their resources are sufficient to work on those goals, and some just work with me a little bit.
How do you manage the complexity of having so much time a week? Like, I'm assuming a lot of, because your products are online, and that enables you to kind of not be on the tool, so to speak. But like, let's say tomorrow someone came to you for the right amount of money and wanted a whole day, or a day a week, or like, would that be on the cards? Like, how do you manage that given a finite amount of time? Because I asked this question selfishly. Yeah, selfishly, I think any advisor, consultant, it's like, well, you've got so many hours a day. How do you focus that to where you think you can add the best value to people and obviously to yourself?
Right. So it is a big difference. So I actually work with a company tomorrow in New Zealand. I'll be with them via Zoom for the day, and in New Zealand time zone. So a little bit time zone shifted for me. And then the next day, I will get on a plane and I will fly to Texas, where I'll work with a team for 2 days in person. And those teams will pay me more. On Wednesday morning, I'll work with people in our hybrid program, and I see those people on a mixture of Zoom and in person sessions, but I only see them twice a year in person, and I see them together with other companies. So I have a whole group of people in our Growth Navigator program, and I can have number of groups, and I have associate coaches and that kind of thing. And then I have people that are in our private elite coaching for teams, and I can only work with 10 or 14 of those companies at a time. And then I have a whole support team. So I have a full time dedicated assistant who manages my schedule and email and calendar and things like that. I have accounting finance team that handles the billing and invoicing. I have a tech team that keeps the online courses and that kind of thing going once I've actually created it. I have a video editor. I have an audio podcast a production team that gets my show ready and schedules and prepares guests and does all kinds of. So I have all kinds of support staff. Only two people are on regular payroll. The other people are on contracts. So I have a whole bunch of folks who help me to get it. And then I've just designed in these weeks, I'm working with my private coaching clients. These weeks, I'm on the road. These weeks, I'm traveling. And that's designed a whole year in advance.
That's a lot of moving parts, and it's a lot of variation of work.
And that suits me because if I do the same thing all the time, I want to stab myself in the eye.
In terms of the kind of companies that you work with, in like I know that you're in the Bay Area. Like, is it mainly tech? Or are you still dealing with bricks and mortar? Like, what's the cross section,
So over the
man?
last 10 years, it's been about 60% funded tech companies and then about 40% of the other. But that goes up and down sometimes. And I work with construction, professional services, healthcare, um, uh, other life sciences, biotech, automotive. I've had several automotive, e-commerce. So a big range.
Do you find that, Bill, that tech is different than everything else? Like in terms of the growth strategy and the go to market. Like, is it different or is it the same?
Well, it's both. So for sure, every industry thinks they're different. Every industry thinks, oh, you don't understand. But the truth is, there's a lot of similarity. And the more you convince yourself you're really different and should be different and don't apply, it leads to mischief and heartache. When a bunch of tech companies convinced themselves that profit was important, we led to the first .com bust of the first part of the internet. And, we have again things now like people went nuts with silly things like NFTs and without creating value for the most part. And that doesn't lead. So the more you convince yourself that your industry is different and doesn't need to follow some fundamentals, you're in trouble. And some of our best breakthroughs have happened when we've crossed learning. So I had a healthcare company who was dealing with some issues in their business model that was very common to their entire sector, to everybody in their category within healthcare, a really common problem. And when I had them explain it to me, not being in that industry, I challenged them and I said, "Well, this is what happens in a services business and how they run that kind of same thing." And you just don't think you're in services. And they paused and they thought about it and they debated for a little while because it was really out of character. And then they went, okay, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And they adopted the same scheduling and customer service management that my hair salon would do for me and changed everything in 90 days, at least in the fundamental metrics and performance of their business. Right? Like, and again, we see that kind of thing. Draw some lessons from other places. Look outside your industry. Stop convincing yourself that you're somehow special.
I'm going to shift the conversation, Bill, to more something personal that we were discussing around some of the work that you had done in the charity space. Because people know my background. I came from a bit of a school of the hard knocks and had an interesting, colorful background. And we were talking about some of the work that you had done in in prisons, because I think that was interesting, right? Like you went into prisons and and you were talking about, my question to you was, do you think, people that had sold drugs or people that were hustling, like they had some skills that could be, I suppose, used, given, they had the right values and I guess infrastructure around their habits and stuff like that. And you had done some work in that space, right?
Yeah. So I spent 2 days coaching in a maximum security prison with people mostly who'd been convicted of drug related murders. And they shared their stories with me and talked to me about the people they'd killed and that kind of thing. Um, I did it at the invitation of a woman named Kat Hoke and a program called Hustle 2.0 that I was introduced to by a friend. And Kat was also on a past guest of my show on the Scaling Up Business podcast, where we talked about our program. But here's the thing that I noticed: like these people that I spent a couple days with shared like just like heartbreaking stories of a profoundly different kind of background that I grew up in. Like, and weren't given the benefit. I have this white, upper middle class, educated North American face, and I get away with a lot of stuff by comparison. They were small, petty crimes that for them, and in communities that were far more violent and tragic than mine. So we had a lot in common. We'd both made mistakes early on. My mistakes just hadn't led me down into my entire environment. But when I heard their stories, and then they told me some of the things they'd done, I'm like, oh, of course you did that. Of course, that was the natural evolution of what you did: the selling drugs and the killing someone and then someone else and then someone else and then someone else. And I remember one guy, and we spent some time looking at each other in the eyes, and then he just said, "Look, I don't really feel that much. I killed so many people. I just don't even. I remember how many, and I didn't feel really anything about it. It was just my job. I just detached from emotionally, and I recognized that they're real people, and they had families and stuff, but it was so like it was detached, right? So, and then other people broke down and cried, and tough guys melted, and I saw a whole range of things, but through it all, they had learned to hustle, to survive. They were small business entrepreneurs, and our program was helping to nurture their legitimate business ideas. Like, I have an idea for a product, or I want to open a barber shop, or whatever. And so we'd give them feedback, and we gave them feedback on their business ideas, and we gave them feedback on their resumes and their interviewing skills. So we taught them to interview, to create a resume, and to do that. Now, some of them are in life sentences, and pending some kind of change, they're not going to get up. But we still worked with them as if they had a future, as if they had something. And some of them were on extended sentences, but had the possibility of parole, and some were coming up sooner, but they're all very serious crime backgrounds. And, we just, first of all, we appreciate each other. We developed some rapport and respect. And mostly like us earning some from them by hearing them out and getting their world. And then listening to their hopes and dreams and their ideas and giving them honest, unfiltered feedback on it. Yeah, like that's a great idea. Or, yeah, that needs work.
Yeah, it's remarkable, Bill. Sometimes I think back on my time. I've come to realize that ambition without opportunity is dangerous for society in many ways, because you'll find people that are going to find a way, and without the right opportunity, they're going to make it happen irrespective. I'll also reflect on some of my time behind bars as well, and realize that some of the leaders in there were remarkable in the sense that they created psychological safety. A lot of people, even when I was in the thick of it, I would be just the chaos and the violence or whatever would be pretty hectic. But now I'm reflecting back on it, particularly for some of the gangs that were in these environments, those gangs provided, and the leaders provided psychological safety. And in the context of a business, that's relevant too.
Yeah, they create like a feeling of a family, like you're part of our tribe and you're with us. We carry you and you take care of us. I'm looking across on my wall over here, and I still have a thank you letter from some of the men I spent time with in that day, thanking me for spending the time and hearing them out and sharing, contributing to them. It was a deeply emotional day. I went there after having experienced a violent attack within my own family, and not, I mean, wanting to do harm to people that I considered criminals. And I went there, and I'm like, I want to know who these people are and what this is. And during the day, we did all that kind of coaching. We also, though, danced with them, and we ate with them. And it was like a full day with people. And, you're dancing around with people with this kind of background, like loud music, dancing in like a basketball court in a gym at the prison. Like, it was amazing. Life altering for sure. Yeah. And to be reminded, to look in somebody's eyes who on the surface looks hard, then to hear their story and to see them soften and to see underneath the skin and to realize there's a human being there, a person who's not done living, a person who still has feelings and who cares and who was hurt deeply, a person whose mom was shot at an early age, a person whose dad was imprisoned, like on and on and on. And they're still a human being, right? And it's good to remember, like, people aren't done. People do things and things happen and they take different paths in their life. But yeah, I think about that with the people with higher functioning backgrounds that I work with more regularly. Like, they make mistakes. They cheat on their spouses. They do unethical things around their business. They have addiction issues and that kind of thing.
Well, look, Bill, I think we're going to start to land the plane on that. I really, really want to take the time to appreciate you and thank you for the time that you've given us here at Ultra Habits. No doubt going to be really valuable to anyone that's looking to do better in their own lives, but scale their business. Where can our audience learn more about you, Bill? Like where do people find you? We'll obviously have it in the show notes, but I want to give you the opportunity to tell us.
Yeah, mine's super easy. All my work and programs and that kind of thing is at scalingcoach.com. Scalingcoach.com. Program, and I have a weekly podcast, all that there.
Yeah, and we'll put that all in the show notes as well. The podcast is excellent. So, Bill, want to thank you again, man. Thank you so much for your time. You have a wonderful evening there.
Thank you for having me on.